Hi everyone, this is going to be the last video looking at implementing the entity framework. In the last one we did CRUD for our recipe model. At this point in this video, what we're going to look at is implementing a many-to-many relationship between the category model and the recipe model, where for each category we can add multiple recipes to it and view recipes that are associated with that category as well as delete them, and then be able to do the same for recipes, but we are only going to do it for category in this video. And then after we do that, we're going to look at a sorting the list of recipes by ascending alphabetically, and then we're gonna do look at a built-in search method that takes a word and searches your whole database for that word. So that's a really cool thing. And so let's start. So yeah, right now you can see on the screen we can view our recipes and our categories. We can add, and then we can view information about specific categories. So here I have breakfast, and what we're going to do right now is add a list of all the recipes associated with breakfast, and then also an option to add recipes to breakfast as well as delete recipes from the breakfast category. So that's what we're going to add to this page. And I think we're going to just start with the view. So we're going to hop over to show here, and we're going to add a lot of stuff to here. So let us start at the top. So first we're going to say here is a list of recipes in this category. And please don't mind my typos. And we're going to do an unordered list, and we're going to call razor and do a for each, and we're going to say for each recipe in the model that we pass in, we're going to say show recipes. So right now we're calling a method that we haven't actually created in our model. We're going to create it in a little bit. We're just setting up for everything that we're going to do down the road. So we're going to call the method show recipes to display all the recipes related to this category. And we're just iterating through them and making each one a link to href equals. And we're grabbing the name. Whatever. So the next thing we're going to do after that is we're going to offer a select menu to add a recipe to this category. And so this select menu will be nested in a form because it's going to be related to a button that we can hit to actually initiate an HTTP post to add an instance in our join table that connects the category and the recipe together. Okay. And at this point, I'm just going to grab this. Show. So here we have our form, we have our submit button that's going to add the recipe to this category, and here we have our select that for this select is going to call another method that we haven't created yet, but we will in a little bit, a get all for the recipe, so that we grab all instances of recipe and we're going to put them all into this select list. And on top of that, we are going to add another option, and we're going to give it the value of 0. This is going to be none. So this option is so that in case you don't want to add this a recipe to a category, that's what you would leave it at. And we give it an integer value of 0, and each recipe name in this list will also have a value which is going to be their ID, and that value is going to be saved into the join table, so it's important that the value for these are the ID. So this is our form to add a recipe to the category. The last one we're going to do is to delete remove a recipe that's associated with the category. So this is also going to be a form, and it's going to be really similar to the one we just did. And yeah, it's actually going to be similar but different. So in our remove a recipe from the category, instead of calling all the recipes in our database, we're just going to show the recipes that are associated with the category already. And again, the value of each recipe is going to be their ID, so that we can go in and access our join table and find the ID of that recipe, where the ID also equals our category ID, and remove it from the database. So this is going to be what our updated show page looks like, our show view, I should say, looks like for our categories. And now we're going to jump over to our routes. So in our category route, not that one, category route, we want to create a post for adding a recipe to a category, and a post route for removing a recipe from a category. So we'll start with adding, and like I said, it's going to be an HTTP post, and the URL is going to have the ID, and we're going to just call this add public action result, and this will be add recipe. And here we're going to pass in the ID from the URL, and then also the recipe ID that we're grabbing from our form. And we're going to open a database connection. We're going to say db equals new recipe context. And we're going to declare a variable named category, and in it we're going to store the specific category that we're dealing with by saying db.tablename categories dot find our built-in method and passing in the ID. And then next we're going to do an if statement. If our recipe ID is greater than 0, then we're going to say join this entry, declaring a new variable, database.join.where j fat arrow j.category underscore ID equals ID and j dot recipe underscore ID equals recipe ID dot, oh shit, I jumped ahead. We're not here. We're gonna say a new join because that's what we're doing right now. Sorry y'alls. So we're essentially creating a new join entry. So we say var new join equals new join, and we say recipe ID, which is the name of one of our columns. That's going to be equal to the variable we pass in, and then we say category underscore ID, the name of another column. We're going to set it equal to the category object that we found dot its ID property, and then we're going to say database dot join. Calling the join table, we're going to say add our object new join. And so specifically, we're doing this if statement because if the value of the select box is none, we don't want to create a new join entry. We don't want to do anything. That's why we have this if statement right here. Otherwise, to save your changes, you say database.save changes, and then we return redirect to action and take us to our show page, and we're passing in the ID for it to display. Okay, so we added our recipe, and specifically what we're adding is an entry into our join table. So that's what's going on here. Our next thing that we're going to do is a HTTP post for removing a category. Sorry, removing a recipe from a category. We're going to call this delete recipe. And public action results. And here we're passing in the ID that we get from the URL and the recipe ID that we get from the form. And like in the last one, we start by opening up the database connection. vardb equals new recipe context. And we find our category that we're dealing with, and we create we store it in a variable called category. db.categories, our table, .find ID. And here again, we're going to put this in an if statement because if no recipe is selected, we don't want to do anything. So if our recipe ID, is greater than 0, then we are going to write a essentially one of the MySQL join commands. This is what we're about to do here, but with our LINQ language. So we're going to say db.join.where, and so DB is our database connection, join is our table, and then here's our where statement. And we say j fat arrow j.category underscore ID equals ID, and j.recipe underscore ID equals recipe ID, and then we end it with first or default. So what we're doing here is we're using this variable. This is syntax that we looked up, Jared and I, and this is just how it goes. This is just a variable that is instantiated here. I guess it stands for the join table, but what we're saying is where the category ID of our join table equals the ID that we're passing in, and the recipe ID of our join table equals the ID that we're passing in. So where those two match, we take first or default, and this was hard to find. We came across a lot of errors before we found it, but it takes the first instance of it or default, whatever that means, not quite sure, but this works. You can look up more ways to do this. So that locates the join table statement. And then after we find it, we store it in a join object that we call this entry, and then we say database.ourTableJoin.remove, and we're passing through this entry. So we're calling the remove method on our join table on our database, and we're passing in the specific join entry that we found. And then at the end, like we always do, we say save changes, and then we redirect to the view that we want to go to. In this case, it's going to go back to show, and we're passing in our ID. And again, the ID to the right of the equal sign is equal to this same ID that's been passed through from our URL, our category ID. Okay, so we have our two routes for the forms that we created. We can add a recipe and we can delete a recipe by clicking our buttons here. This one's our remove, this one's our add. The only thing we're missing at this point for this all to work are our two methods. One is to show recipes, and another one is to get all. So let's start with the get all. That's pretty straightforward. We want to grab all recipes, period, so that we can display that so that our user can look through it and figure out which one they want to add to the category. So that one we're actually going to write in our recipe model. So get all. And this is extremely basic. Public static list of recipe get all. Except for this is going to look very different from our previous get all methods. We're going to say return, oh my gosh, new recipe context. So we're calling our database, and then we're going into our recipes table, and then we're just saying to list. Everything in there, turn it into a list. And you could write this out on multiple lines, but this also works. And again, we're establishing our connection to their database. We're going into the recipes table, and we're calling the built-in method toList to grab all the items and put it into a list. So that's our getAll method. And so when we look at our show now, we call, in our add recipe to this category, we're going to call recipe.getAll. And the specific reason why we're able to call our model here .getAll instead of how we've usually been doing it by up here, as I have highlighted, saying model.name or model.whatever method we want to call. We're just calling the whole model name recipe.getAll, and that's because at the very top we're saying we're doing @using recipes.models, and that's why that works. So the next thing we want to do is a show recipes, and this is going to be a method that we create in our category model, and it's going to show all recipes that are specifically associated with that category. So we're going to hop over to this one, and I already had it kind of going, but we're going to start over here. Okay, so here we are, show recipes. This is going to return a list of recipe objects, and our method is called show recipes. And here we're going to create two lists. The first list is going to be the one that we return, a list of recipe objects. We're going to call this dlist. And set it equal to a new list, blah, blah, blah. We all know this. Empty list. And then we're going to establish our db variable, which is our new recipe context. And then the second list that we're going to work with is a list of join objects. Calling this the join list. And we are going to call our join table and take all the objects in it and put it into a list and store it into our join list. That's what it does. It goes into our database, it goes to the join table, and it says toList, built-in method. And then we're going to say for each item, which is our join object, for each join object, which we're calling item, in join list, if item.category ID equals ID, which this is going to be the ID of the category object that we're calling show recipes on. So if item.category underscore ID equals ID and item.recipe underscore ID is greater than 0, the list dot add db dot recipes So we're saying if our category ID equals the ID of our category that we're calling the recipe on, and our recipe ID is greater than 0, meaning that there is a recipe ID associated with the category ID, as opposed to a category ID associated to an ingredient ID, which we haven't even touched. We're going to say to our list of recipe objects add, and then we're searching in the database, we're going to the recipes table, and then we're calling find, and we're finding it by the item.recipe ID. And that's that. And we get out of the for each, and we return the list. And so now we have our show recipes method, and we can dynamically add recipes to a category and remove recipes from a category, and view all the recipes associated with the category.